uneducated, in a conservative milieu, knows who the hell Wilberforce was. And I just don't know what to do.
Or Thaddeus Stevens, or the heroism of John Quincy Adams. Those would be, some main protagonist characters for the abolitionist slavery here in America. And so when I was in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, something in me, and I don't quite know, my parents very patriotic, but not political. Patriotic, but not political. They're conservative, but we were not a political family. But very patriotic. Something in me desired to try to find the other side of the story, to try to push back a little bit from the incessant narrative that was being built. And I do want to make sure this is clear. We were not yet at the place where the teachers were saying America was racist. In fact, it was actually much more insidious than that.
And so that even in 2008, that still wasn't occurring.
I could make, at least in my environment, I could make an argument, though, that what they were doing when I was in high school is actually long-term much more effective to create revolutionaries for the left than what they're doing now, because it really didn't warrant that much of a backlash. It wasn't overly provocative. They weren't saying to the white kids in class, hey, go sit on this side of the class, and black kids on this side of the class.
Yeah, well, those things always happen one tiny step at a time.
Of course, but when I was being schooled, there was no parents showing up at school board meetings about critical race theory. Now, these elements were laced throughout all of the curriculum.
Right.
And it took a very discerning eye. And for whatever reason, how I was raised or just something in me, around 10th or 11th grade, I asked the question. I said, look, we have spent an entire month on slavery. Totally get it. Terrible thing. But we spent so little time on the brilliance of the founders and what they've created and the greatest political document in human history and what went into that. And it was an underemphasis on the heroism and the courage and the brilliance, and an overemphasis on the evil and the tragedy and the horror without even the redemption arc behind it.
Well, the thing that's so awful about that, as far as I'm concerned, from the leftist perspective, let's say, is if you are concerned with the poor and the oppressed, and then you have to be discerning there, because there are people who are poor and oppressed as a consequence of their own idiocy. And that's not so uncommon, as you know in your own life, by watching your pathway to failure. So, but given that there are people who are unfortunate, you'd think that the appropriate tack would be to determine who in history served them most effectively. And I just can't see anyone you could possibly point to who did that more effectively than Wilberforce, ever. And so you would think that instead of erecting monuments to Lenin, the leftists would erect monuments to Wilberforce. But not only do they not do that, no one knows who the hell he was.
It is one of the greatest memory holing of a hero in Western history.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Why is it? My hypothesis is he's Christian. Is that you cannot highlight a man of faith who did something with such valor and such significance. It is at odds with almost every other fundamental narrative that they must try to present.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right, that it is fundamentally, but that begs another question, and that would be why, given that Wilberforce was clearly a force for the good that Obama, for example, would have been pushing, right? By which I mean movement towards a polity where there was no racial or ethnic prejudice. If Wilberforce is the poster boy for that sort of effort, which if you understand his life and you read about it, I can't see how you can conclude that, then why would the lefties forego that merely to oppose the fact that his motivation was fundamentally Christian? Because that points to something deeper, right? It points to the fact that the true war, so to speak, isn't political. It's not left versus right. It's something deeper. And then if it is anti-Christian, then why? Like, what does that mean? Like, there's an Enlightenment element there, right? The Enlightenment types, especially after the French Revolution, generated this narrative that science and religion were radically opposed, and that if you were on the side of religion, you were against clear, rational, logical thinking. And so you could imagine a stream of anti-Christian sentiment emerging on the rationalist side, right? But it isn't obvious to me at all that the leftist types who don't talk about Wilberforce are anti-Christian because they're scientific rationalists.
No.
Like, no.
No way.
All you have to do is talk to them for like 15 seconds and you find out that that's not the case. They might use those arguments from time to time, but they certainly don't apply the rigors of scientific thinking to their own radical hypotheses. So it's deeper than that. And so what is it exactly that they're objecting to? Is it the fact that the more radical leftist story, Marxist, let's say, is in its essence anti-Christian, which I think is a fair statement, but why would that be more important? This is the strange thing. Why would that be more important than serving the poor and fighting for the abolition of slavery and all of its associated prejudices? Because it still doesn't get you out of the conundrum, which is why not Wilberforce? Instead of tearing down statues, why not erect statues to him? Yeah. So, well, I know that's a hard thing to sort out, but you got any? Yeah, obviously you were feeling something this in high school,
that's
right?
Correct.
You guys are throwing out the baby with the bathwater here.
Correct.
Yeah. Which baby exactly?
So my initial thought is that the leftist types, the ones that really understand it, they do not seek to achieve what a Wilberforce type figure would want, which is actual liberation and actual eradication of evil.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. I think they just want to be in charge.
Yeah, no, I think.
And
okay, so let's pivot on that for a minute. Okay, so because this is a problem that's going to face the right, and is already, and we can talk about that. So there are a group of people, 4% of the population, and then there's still a fringe around that would maybe be another 5% where you'd have to take it seriously. And so they're in the psychiatric diagnostic literature, they fall under the cluster B heading. Okay, they're histrionic, which means they're dramatic, and I suppose if they're healthy and histrionic, then they become actors, right, and entertainers. So there's a positive spin on that. But if they're negative histrionic, they dramatize their pathology and use it as a weapon. Okay, they're narcissistic, which means they want unearned social status. They're psychopathic, which means they're predatory parasites, and they're antisocial, and that's just your standard criminal types. So that all fits in cluster B. And there's personality traits that go along with that. Machiavellian, they use language